What is it about the night sky that makes us look up and wonder if something out there is looking back? Maybe it's the vastness of it all, the way the stars seem so close yet impossibly far. Or maybe it's the stories, the ones that have been passed down for generations, about things that fell from the heavens and landed in our world. Today we're diving into two of the strangest tales ever told. One takes us to the dark, foggy hills of West Virginia in 1952, where a group of ordinary people came face to face with a towering, hissing creature that seemed to float above the ground.
So I knew Freddie quite well. We were actually neighbors for at least 7 years. Whenever Freddie would talk about the story, there's debate as to what this thing was, whether it was an owl, a robot, an alien. And if you talk to him, though, as far as I can tell, it wasn't really the witnesses that ever called it anything. They just described what they saw and tried to describe it as best they could.
The other crosses oceans and centuries, from a modern-day forest in Australia, where two hikers stumbled upon what looked like a crashed spacecraft, to a tiny Texas town in 1897, where witnesses claimed an alien pilot was buried in a local cemetery. Are these stories proof that we're not alone? Or is there a simpler explanation hiding in the shadows? Stick around, because we're about to separate the facts from the fog and figure out what really happened. And trust me, some of these answers might surprise you.
I always go back to the original sketch done based off of Kathleen May's testimony that was done back in 1952. It's become almost iconic at this point. The conclusion that it's an alien came from an object flying through the sky, but they didn't call it an alien. They just described it the way I described it to you, to where it doesn't make any sense. It might as well be an alien, but it's not like they asked it for its papers. They ran. It seemed like if you knew the May family really well, or you knew any of the witnesses really well, and you heard their testimony, the typical reaction is that they believed, whatever the witnesses say happened, that's what happened. But then the other camp, if you didn't know them very well, rumors would start, that it was some sort of hoax, or that, the boys were drinking moonshine. Whatever would have happened, it would have had to correspond with aerial phenomena that a bunch of people saw.
Imagine picking up a newspaper in 1952 and reading about a 10-foot-tall monster with a glowing red face and a head shaped like the ace of spades, wrapped in metallic clothing and hissing at people from behind a tree in the West Virginia woods. This wasn't the plot of a B-movie playing at the local drive-in, although it easily could have been. This was the front-page reality for the tiny, isolated community of Flatwoods, a place so small and tucked into the mountainous terrain that nothing ever happened there. But on the night of September 12th, 1952, something did happen, and it would spark a frenzy of fear, fuel Cold War paranoia, and cement the Flatwoods monster as one of America's most enduring and bizarre cryptids. To understand what happened, you have to picture the scene. It's a Friday evening, just around dusk. Three brothers, 13-year-old Edward and 11-year-old Freddie May, are playing football at the local elementary school with a friend named Tommy Heyer. As the sky starts to darken, they all stop and look up. A bright, fiery object streaks across the sky, a pulsing ball of orange and red light that seems to be moving slower than a typical meteor. It doesn't just vanish, it descends, appearing to land or crash on the crest of a hill owned by a local farmer named Bailey Fisher, just a few hundred yards away. The boys, hearts pounding with a mix of terror and the irresistible curiosity that only young boys possess, ran straight home to tell their mother, Kathleen May. To her immense credit, Kathleen May didn't dismiss them. She took their story seriously. Being a resourceful sort, she called their teenage neighbor Eugene Lemon, who was a member of the National Guard. Eugene grabbed a flashlight and his dog, a loyal spaniel, and the group, which now included Kathleen, the three boys, Eugene and two more friends, Neil Nunley and Ronnie Shaver, marched towards the hill to investigate the strange light. It was a group of 7 ordinary people, a mom and a bunch of kids, about to walk into a legend. As they climbed the hill, the atmosphere began to change. A thick, ground-hugging mist rolled in, seemingly out of nowhere. The air grew heavy with a strange, pungent smell, an odor one witness would later describe as something like the frying of bacon, mixed with a metallic, sickening quality that burned their noses and throats. Eugene's dog, who had been bounding ahead, suddenly stopped. He started barking furiously at something in the darkness, and then, with his tail tucked firmly between his legs, he turned and ran back down the hill, whimpering. Undeterred, or perhaps too curious to turn back now, the group pressed on. Eugene Lemon was in the lead with his flashlight, scanning the area near a large oak tree. That's when he saw it. The beam of his flashlight illuminated a pair of glowing eyes. And behind those eyes was something so terrifying that Eugene screamed, fell backward, and the entire group was frozen in primal fear. Standing just a few feet away, partially hidden by the mist and the oak tree, was a towering figure. It was enormous, estimated to be between 7 and 12 feet tall. It had a large, round, blood-red face that seemed to pulsate or glow from within. The head was not round, but rather shaped like a spade from a deck of playing cards, a pointed hood or cowl surrounding the terrifying face. Its body was draped in what looked like a metallic robe or garment, and from beneath the folds they could see what appeared to be thin, claw-like hands. The creature wasn't standing on legs. It seemed to float or glide, hovering a foot or two above the ground. As the flashlight hit it, the monster turned towards them and made a chilling, high-pitched hissing sound, like steam escaping or air being rapidly released. That was all the group could take. They turned and ran, tearing back down the hill as fast as their legs could carry them, bursting through the door of Kathleen May's house and immediately calling the local sheriff. The news spread like wildfire through the small community. Within hours, people from all over Braxton County were flocking to Flatwoods to see what the commotion was about. The local newspaper editor, A. Lee Stewart, even grabbed a shotgun and led a search party back up the hill. But aside from the lingering acrid smell and some strange, dark, greasy tracks on the ground, there was nothing to be found. The monster was gone. In the days that followed, the story took on a new and unsettling dimension. Several of the witnesses, especially Eugene Lemon, who had been closest to the creature, became ill, and they suffered from nausea, vomiting, and swelling in their throats. Eugene's condition worsened to the point of partial paralysis, and his mother reported that he was sick for weeks. A doctor who examined them noted that their symptoms were similar to those caused by exposure to mustard gas or some kind of industrial irritant. Even more tragically, Eugene's dog, the one who had first sounded the alarm and ran away, died just 2 days after the encounter. Something in that mist had been very real and very toxic. The national media descended on Flatwoods. The Associated Press picked up the story, and soon newspapers from the Daytona Beach Evening News to the Boston Globe were running headlines about the Braxton County monster. Kathleen May and Eugene Lemon were even invited to New York to tell their story on a CBS television program, where a sketch artist worked with them to create the now iconic image of the creature. The spade-shaped head, the floating body, the whole terrifying package. To understand why this story exploded the way it did, you have to look at the world in 1952. This was the peak of the Cold War. The Soviet Union had the atomic bomb. The Korean War was raging and had already claimed young men from Braxton County, and Senator Joseph McCarthy was fueling fears that communists were hiding under every bed. The American public was anxious, primed for threats both real and imagined. Just 5 months before the Flatwoods incident, Life magazine, the most popular publication in America at the time, ran a stunning cover story. And the headline asked, "Have we visitors from space?" And the article inside, filled with accounts from credible witnesses like Air Force pilots, suggested that the government was taking the possibility of flying saucers very seriously. That article legitimized the idea of extraterrestrial visitors in the public mind. So, when a group of terrified people in West Virginia reported a monster from the sky, the public had a ready-made framework for understanding it. It wasn't just a monster. It was an alien. The Air Force certainly took it seriously enough to investigate. The case was added to the files of Project Blue Book, the official U.S. Air Force program tasked with investigating UFOs. The lead scientific consultant for Blue Book, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, was initially skeptical. The Air Force's official explanation, of which they eventually landed on, was fairly straightforward. The bright fireball in the sky? Almost certainly a brilliant meteor, or fireball, which multiple witnesses across several states had reported that night. The creature itself? They theorized it was a misidentification of a great horned owl. Think about it. A startled owl, perched on a branch with its wings folded, can appear humanoid in the dark. Its feathers can create a hooded look. Its large, round eyes glow brightly in a flashlight beam, and its defensive hiss is a sound that would chill anyone to the bone. The theory suggests that the metallic garment was just the pattern of the owl's feathers, and the claw-like hands were its talons gripping the branch. The thick mist and the intense fear of the moment did the rest, the magnifying a common barn owl into a 10-foot-tall monster. This owl theory is the most commonly accepted skeptical explanation. But it's not the only one, and it has its problems. How do you explain the strange illness that afflicted the witnesses? Can an owl cause nausea, throat swelling, and partial paralysis? And what about the testimony of Kathleen May herself, who insisted until her death that what she saw was no bird? She stated flatly, "We got close enough to it so I could see exactly what it was, and we all saw the same thing. I was as close to it as the length of a car." UFO investigator Frank Fascino Jr., who spent over 2 decades researching the case and wrote a book on it, argues that the owl theory is a simplistic dismissal of a much larger event. And he claims that the Flatwoods sighting was just one small part of a massive, sustained UFO flap that occurred over the eastern United States that week, involving multiple craft and corroborating witnesses across 9 different states. Now, let's turn our attention to another set of images that have been making the rounds online for years. They show something that looks like it belongs in a science fiction movie. A strange, metallic object nestled deep in the woods, partially obscured by trees and undergrowth. The story attached to these photos claims that 2 men were hiking through a forest in Australia, near Victoria, when they literally stumbled across this odd-looking craft. At first, they had no idea what they were looking at, but after walking around it, studying its unusual shape and metallic surface, they came to a chilling conclusion. They had found a crashed UFO. The photographs spread quickly across the internet, and as you can imagine, people had a lot to say. Some pointed out that the images seemed almost too perfect, too clear to be genuine evidence of something so monumental. But here's where the story takes its first strange turn. Despite the skepticism, the photos themselves are real. They aren't digital creations or elaborate hoaxes. In fact, A report was even filed with MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, which is one of the oldest and most respected organizations dedicated to investigating UFO sightings. According to that report, a genuine crashed UFO had been discovered deep within an Australian forest, and these photographs were the proof. The story behind the photos goes like this. The two witnesses claimed that after discovering the craft, they spent about 20 minutes examining it and taking several photographs. Then, for whatever reason, they decided to head home. Maybe they were overwhelmed, maybe they needed time to process what they'd found, or maybe they just wanted to grab better equipment. Whatever the case, they left the crashed object there in the woods and went back to their lives. But when they returned, determined to film the craft and gather more evidence, they got the shock of their lives. And the UFO was gone. In its place, covering the entire area where the craft had been sitting, was police tape. Someone had gotten there first and cordoned off the site, and the mysterious object had vanished without a trace. For several weeks, these photographs remained a genuine mystery. People speculated wildly about what they showed, where they came from, and what had really happened in that Australian forest. But eventually, the truth came out, and like so many of these stories, the truth was actually pretty simple. The object in the photographs was real, and people really did stumble across it in the woods. But it wasn't a UFO from another world. It was a prop. Specifically, it was a prop left over from the set of a television show called Hunters, which was filming in the area. The strange metallic craft was a piece of science fiction set dressing, designed to look like an alien ship for the cameras. Someone on the crew had either abandoned it or left it behind temporarily. And these two hikers had the bad luck or good luck, depending on how you look at it, of being the ones to find it and start the internet frenzy. Now, this particular mystery turned out to have a fairly straightforward explanation. But not every story about crashed UFOs wraps up so neatly. There's one case in particular that has haunted investigators for well over a century, and it involves a small town in Texas, a dead alien pilot, and a grave that may or may not hold the remains of something not from this earth. Go back with me to April 17th, 1897. The place is Aurora, Texas. A tiny and quiet town that most people had never heard of, and probably would never have heard of if not for what happened that night. Residents were going about their evening when something strange appeared in the sky above them. It was an airship, trailing smoke and struggling to maintain altitude. Witnesses said it seemed to be slowing down and speeding up erratically, as if the pilot was fighting to regain control. The craft sailed over the public square, heading north, and that's when things went terribly wrong. It clipped the edge of a windmill, the impact tearing into its structure, and then veered directly into the path of the town's water tower. The collision was catastrophic. The airship exploded into pieces, wreckage scattering across the property and waking residents who rushed outside to see what had happened. When the townspeople reached the crash site, they found something that terrified them far more than the explosion itself. Among the wreckage was the pilot. The being was dead, killed instantly in the crash, and its body was badly disfigured. But even in death, it was clear to everyone who saw it that this was no ordinary human. It wasn't an inhabitant of this earth. The creature was small, with a strange appearance that didn't match anything the townspeople had ever seen before. Inside the wreckage of the craft, witnesses reported seeing strange markings on the control panels, symbols that looked like hieroglyphics, but unlike any writing system known to exist. The people of Aurora were terrified. They were simple folk, living in a time before UFOs were part of the cultural conversation. Before alien visitors were something people speculated about over morning coffee. They didn't know what to do with this strange, dead creature and its otherworldly ship. So they did what made sense to them. They buried the pilot in the local cemetery, giving it a quiet grave far from prying eyes. And they dumped the wreckage, all the strange metal and mysterious debris, into a deep well on the property, hoping that if they hid the evidence, the whole terrifying incident would simply disappear from their town's history. For decades, that's exactly what happened. The story of the Aurora crash faded into local legend, told around campfires and passed down through families, but never really investigated or verified. That changed when an investigative reporter decided to dig into the case decades later. He determined to find out whether there was any truth behind the century-old tale. He started by trying to locate the remains of the spacecraft itself. If the wreckage had truly been dumped into a well, he reasoned, there might still be evidence. So he found the old well, located near the site where the windmill once stood, and arranged to have the water tested. What he found was fascinating. The water in the well contained elevated levels of metals, including aluminum, which was present but not necessarily unusual. But there were also traces of other elements, metals that weren't supposed to be there, metals that didn't naturally occur in that environment. The well's owner was surprised by the findings, but also mentioned something troubling. Since he had started using the well water, he had begun experiencing pains in his joints. He had recently been diagnosed with early-onset arthritis, a condition that could potentially be linked to contaminated water. It wasn't proof of a crashed spaceship, but it was certainly suggestive. Encouraged by this, the investigator turned his attention to the other piece of the puzzle, the alien pilot's grave. He went to the Aurora cemetery and began searching. Before long, he found something promising. There was a grave marker, a headstone that seemed to show some sort of spacecraft carved into it. The design was crude but unmistakable, and it stood out from every other marker in that old cemetery. His metal detector also gave faint readings around that spot, suggesting something metallic buried beneath the surface. It seemed like he had finally located the final resting place of the Aurora alien. Not feeling confident that he was onto something real, the investigator approached the local cemetery association. He asked for permission to perform an exhumation, to open that grave and see what, if anything, was really buried there. He also wanted to conduct a more thorough operation to retrieve the spacecraft debris from the well, to analyze it properly and finally put this mystery to rest. But the Cemetery Association refused. They wouldn't grant permission, wouldn't even discuss the possibility. Frustrated but undeterred, the investigator returned to the cemetery anyway, just to take more photographs and maybe gather more evidence. What he found stopped him cold. The grave marker was gone, completely vanished. In its place was nothing but empty ground, and when he ran his metal detector over the spot again, the readings that had been so promising just days before now showed absolutely nothing. Someone had been there, and someone had removed every trace of evidence. The grave had been erased. So, what do you make of this story? The crashed UFO in Australia turned out to be a movie prop, a simple explanation for a modern mystery. But the Aurora crash has no such tidy ending. It remains open, unresolved, waiting for someone to dig deeper. Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to help us keep investigating these unexplained mysteries, don't forget to subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.